In today's video, I'm going to share with you a thought experiment and how I came to the conclusion that Sony is not ever going to allow these countries to play the game. It was always intended to be that way, and furthermore, they lied to all of us. So there I am on the Helldiver 2 Discord, as one normally is, and I couldn't help but notice that everyone is talking about Sony, but not just about the drama, but how they're losing money by continuing to block all these countries from buying the game. On the surface, it makes sense. If there's a bunch of people who can't buy your game, then, well, that's a lot of money you're not making. Because if there's anything we can all agree on, it's that Sony loves money. So why would they continue to implement a decision like blocking all these countries if it's costing them money? And so, I went looking for answers. Well, howdy there, Terminid. Do you know why Sony keeps blocking these countries from playing the game? He's got a point. Excuse me, Mr. Robot. Would you please tell me, why does Sony keep blocking all these countries?
Heart, steal, we kill.
Honestly, same. It seems I'm just not gonna find my answer here. I'm gonna have to go to the internet. Okay, so starting off, let me walk you through my thought process, and ultimately, at the end of this video, you'll figure out the real reason why Sony continues to block these countries, and if they really are losing money. The answer may shock you. Also, disclaimer, everything said in this video is public information available to anyone and mostly just an opinion, and the data I've gathered is just an approximation, and you should not use this in a court of law. Also, this message is sponsored by Super Earth. Okay, so first things first, I asked it to make a list in descending order of countries with the most active gamers. And what we find is the top two countries being China and the United States. Not so surprising. China with 742 million gamers and the United States with 210 million. That's kind of wild. China has nearly 4 times the amount of gamers than the United States. Also, you'll notice Japan coming at number 4 with one of the highest gaming penetrations of all the countries on this list. With 73.4 million gamers, that is 58% of their entire population. That is crazy. Japan be gaming. That's actually kind of interesting, because as far as I know, Japan has a lot of older people in their population. Like, it's actually kind of a crisis. So now I'm just thinking of, like, now you have 11-year-old Jimmy kicking your ass in Fortnite and, dancing on your dead body. But now you also got fucking 85-year-old Mr. Miyagi in Japan just like, that's right, motherfucker, kiss my ass. Yeah, that was my impression of a old Japanese guy. Now here's a great example of why I refuse to use Google for this. There are 177 countries I needed information on, and with ChatGPT, I could just plug it in, and it scans it, and it can see all the countries, and now every question I ask, it can give me an answer for every single one of these countries. So I plugged the picture in and I asked, do any of the following countries in this picture have a significant amount of gamers? What we find are the top countries being the Philippines, South Africa, Egypt, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Nigeria. So these countries have shown significant growth and engagement in the gaming sector, contributing to the global gaming community despite various restrictions and challenges they might face. But we need more information than that, so I just asked it straight up, is there an estimate of how many gamers there are in total for all the countries combined? Now here's where things get a little tricky. As I suspected, it's kind of difficult to get that information. Already, the estimates for the top 10 countries are just that, they're estimates, but we have a lot more data to go off of with those countries. For these countries, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So here's the response I got. Based on the available data for the countries listed, and assuming an average gaming penetration rate of 30%, the total population of these countries is 2.24 billion combined, making the estimate number of gamers with 30% 672 million. So now I'm kind of getting excited. I'm thinking, dang, is Sony really that stupid? Why the fuck would they miss out on so many potential buyers? So I went back into my crazy asylum of a brain and I thought, what is another good piece of information that I could use to deduce this secret of all secrets? And, it's not really anything that crazy, to be honest. But here's what I did. I decided to remove Japan, the Philippines, because I was curious how much they made up of this potential consumer base. And honestly, I was kind of surprised. What we find is the adjusted total population going from 2.24 billion down to 1.98 billion people. This now brings the estimated active gamers of all these countries combined, excluding Japan and Philippines, to 593 million. Now that we know that Japan and the Philippines actually don't have a huge impact, I was curious what the population was for the rest of these countries. So I asked it to give me the top 10 countries by population on this list. Now look, I'm not even trying to be funny here, but if you look at this list, you see countries like Ethiopia and Iran and Algeria, and these countries, they're not known to have the best economies. Which brings me to my next factor that I'll be implementing into this thought experiment, and that is to consider the economic standing of each country in order to come up with a better percentage of potential gamers per country. Knowing if the average worker in the top 10 most populous countries from the remaining list can afford a gaming system like a PlayStation 5 is complex and depends on several economic factors, including income level, cost of living, and purchasing power parity. It then gives me a brief description of the economic standing for each of these countries, and unfortunately, what we find is that a lot of these countries don't have an economy where the average worker can afford a gaming system. With Nigeria, which was number 1 in this list at 200 million population, Nigeria has a significant wealth gap and high poverty rates. While there is a growing middle class, the majority of the population may not afford luxury items like the PS5. It really gets you thinking, right? Luxury item like the PS5. Sometimes we just take so much for granted. So I think it's fair to assume at this point the 30% penetration that we were using earlier is probably a bit too high. And basically it agreed, and it moved the average penetration from 30% down to 20%. And as a reminder, what this means is for each country's population, we assume that 30% are gamers, and we are now moving that down to 20%. I still personally feel this is a bit optimistic, but we're gonna just stick with it for now so that we can move on. And then after some quick calculations, what we see is the new adjusted estimate for gamers across all these blocked countries being about 395 million gamers. Now remember earlier, I removed Japan and the Philippines from this equation because I thought it would have a big impact on the total population. Turns out it didn't, so we're going to bring them back into the equation with this new 20% average. And what we get is around 440 million potential gamers being blocked from buying Helldivers 2. That is crazy. Now I do think this number is still a bit too high, but even if we just chop off a quarter of that, let's just bring it down to 300 million. That is still more than the United States, which is number 2 on most active gamers in the world. And so now it begs the question, why would Sony block itself from that many potential consumers? There must be a reason, because if there's anything that we can all agree on, it's that Sony likes to make money, right? Most big companies do. So there must be a reason to not allow these countries to purchase the game. So here are 6 reasons why Sony likely decided to block selling the game to these countries. I'm not going to cover them all, but there are 2 that stand out to me. The first one being infrastructure challenges. Selling the PlayStation 5 to these countries would mean producing more consoles. However, as we discussed, these countries don't have the greatest economies, so there is likely not enough confidence from Sony to enter their market. The amount of resources spent to produce more consoles compared to how many would sell is likely too high of a risk in turning a profit. So okay, sure, let's say we all agree that makes sense. Well, why can't these countries just play the game on Steam? That doesn't require making more PlayStations. This brings us to regulatory and legal issues. You see, in a digital world where you sell a product globally, you are suddenly faced with an overwhelming amount of local laws and regulations to abide by. In the context of a video game, these compliance issues can include things like age rating, censorship, the overall content within the game, data collection, and online transactions like the in-game shop. So yeah, Sony skipping over a potential 300 million consumers sounds crazy, but we have to remember this number is spread over 177 different countries. That's 177 countries each with their own local laws and regulations. Sony likely has determined that it wasn't worth the time and resources in comparison to potential profit to enter these markets. Additionally, we have to remember that selling a game is one thing, but selling data is another. Sony, like many other large tech companies, generate revenue from selling data and subscription services. So if most of these countries don't allow Sony to implement their data collection the way that they want to, it's likely already not worth it for them to even deal with these countries. Now add all the other complexities and expenses on top of that, it just kind of makes sense why Sony wouldn't want to sell to these countries. Again, it doesn't mean I agree, and I can understand why people are upset, but I'm just trying to rationally see things from a business perspective. While this decision is not inherently bad, it's the way that Sony approached it. That was the problem. Because look, let's be real. Come, take a walk with me, okay? This is me walking. We're walking, we're talking, we're having a great time. You know, the stunt that Sony pulled recently, most people are pretty pissed off about it, and for good reason. And goddamn, am I impressed with you guys, because we came together and we completed this major order. I'm also very much out of breath. But anyways, yes, I am very much impressed by the Helldivers 2 community, you know, besides the people who acted like complete buffoons. But yeah, everyone came together ultimately to make Sony, a major corporation, step back on a decision that I've never really seen happen in gaming history. Now, let's be a little bit realistic. I do think that the community had a big impact on Sony's decision, but ultimately, it was likely because they were facing legal issues. You see, Sony sold a bunch of games to countries that they knew all along they would eventually block from having access to the game that they own and have been playing for several months now. And then they retroactively changed the wording on their website from "it is optional to link a PSN account" to "some games will require you to link a PSN account." And they never made any kind of public announcement about these changes, so they were probably hoping it would go unnoticed. But thankfully, PC gamers have no life, and we fucking got them, baby. They done got caught, and, you know, that's what it is. I think that's ultimately why Sony changed their decision, because hundreds of thousands of people not only left negative reviews and were hurting one of their most successful games' reputation, but they kind of called them out for something that was quite illegal. So they didn't really have a choice. And of course, they're trying to phrase it like they're listening to the community. Hey guys, we heard you and we're listening because we're Sony, and at Sony, we care about gamers. And also, we're still learning about the PC community. So thank you for sharing your feedback, because it wasn't totally fucking obvious that this was a shitty decision. No, we needed a bunch of gamers to tell us what the right thing to do was, so thank you. We're just a tiny little company and we're still learning. And you fucking caught us, okay? You got us! Good fucking job! You happy? Now I have to go from a platinum jet to a gold jet. What's that? We're still live? Anyways, thanks guys, and we will definitely not try to implement this in the future and hope that you forget about it. Goodbye! So to wrap things up, because I didn't want to drag this out, but somehow I always turn what's supposed to be a couple minutes into an eternity, because I'm an absolute master at yapping.
And this is where I'd put a trophy, if I had one!
So, in conclusion, what have we learned? Pretty much nothing. But seriously, the reason I did this thought experiment is because, again, I knew there had to be a logistical reason for Sony to make this decision. But I think so many people are just kind of caught in the moment of beating Sony, and now we just need to get these other countries back in and playing with us. It can be easy to think that way, but I really wanted to break it down. And I think now, at this point, after doing this thought experiment, I hate to say it, I don't have much hope that Sony is going to allow these countries to buy the game again. I think it was always intended for it to be this way. They just approached it the wrong way and fucked up. So they had to walk back on a certain aspect of it, but ultimately, these countries will remain restricted. And moving forward, I do think Sony is going to continue to try and have their PC games connected to a PSN account. It just makes sense. Why would they want so many players to not reflect on their PlayStation Network? So while they are allowing players for Helldivers to not connect their account anymore, I do think for pretty much all their other PC games, they will require it. I guess we'll just have to find out, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to push it on Helldivers again sometime in the future when all this drama has passed. So, yep, that's it. Guys, hear me out. What if we just dance with the bugs? You ever see the way they move? I think they just want to groove. You know what I'm saying? What's that? Oh, he's right behind me.
Oh, sweet liberty! We'll be right back after these sponsored messages for Super Earth.